Hello, and welcome to today's episode of the Exposure Scientist podcast. I just want to kind of go over a few, I'll say, programming notes before we get into today's topic of Legionella and Legionnaires disease. The first topic is AIHA Connect. It's our annual industrial hygiene conference. This year it is taking place in Kansas City. I was planning on being there and actually speaking at the event, but unfortunately some scheduling conflicts arose, so I cannot attend the conference. So if you are planning on meeting with me, I'd still love to have a conversation with you. Reach out via phone, via email. We'll get something scheduled and get connected that way to make sure that we continue our conversations that we were having or planning on having at the conference. Additionally, we are testing out a new website for our podcast that is going to let you actually leave some voice messages for the show that we can actually play on the show. So if you're interested in that option, that website will be up and running. We're going to have the opportunity for you to go there, try it out, leave some messages, leave some comments for me. Of course, I'm always open to having guests on the show, but this would be an interesting opportunity to leave a 30-second or 1 minute kind of message that I can respond to. So I'd love for you to try that option out, and hopefully we'll be able to implement it here on the program within the next few episodes. As I mentioned before, today's topic is going to be Legionella and Legionnaires disease. Now, we're recording this at the beginning of May 2025. We're getting into that season, the summer season, where Legionella and the presence of Legionella within building water systems and all water systems generally, unless they're being controlled, are going to increase. It's going to that increase in temperature, and as we've seen with data, and even as I presented AIHA Connect last year, there's always this increase in the middle of May, and it ramps up through the summer, through the fall, and then starts to get back down in the winter. So we're reaching that time where cases of Legionnaire's disease are going to be increasing throughout, I'll say, the United States. And I bring that up because it's interesting, because I've seen some news cases, a lot of the news cases, and that makes sense. A lot of the news reports have indicated that there have been Legionnaire disease cases in other places in the Southern Hemisphere. A lot have been in Australia that I've seen, because, I mean, they're just coming out of their summer season. I've seen some more so in Europe lately. Seen a number of different reports and stories of Legionella cases or Legionnaire's disease cases in Europe. Most recently, there was a cruise ship that they sent notification to the cruise line. I'm not going to name them. You can go look up the news story. The cruise line sent notification to a particular ship. Of course, originally it said it was all ships, and then I saw a news report that said it was to a particular ship that reported that someone had Legionnaire's disease. So it is that time of year now. Of course, within cruise ships, there's supposed to be control mechanisms for taking care of this, and testing protocols and everything else, because those are almost like their own little public water utility. They're treating their water, they're storing their water. Those are known places where Legionella can crop up. Other places that have been in the news in the United States, there was a courthouse, I think, in Ohio recently that tested positive for having Legionella in the water. There's some nursing homes that have been testing positive. There's some news reports, and even a children's hospital on the West Coast have been found to be positive for Legionella within their building water systems. So it's that time of year. I always like to bring it up because this is that time where, if you have not been adequately addressing your facility water systems, this is the time to think about doing so, to make sure that you're capturing, that you're mitigating any of these problems. There have been some facilities that I have been at recently and lately that have had some programs implemented by, I'll say, larger corporations and organizations. It's never a bad idea to have any third-party oversight come in there and say, okay, let's evaluate these systems. Let's see what's going on. Let's understand the effectiveness of these systems. Kind of do some checks of who you have in there. You know, there's no problem with an independent third-party check of what's going on to make sure that you're mitigating any potential risk, or mitigating the potential risk for the development of Legionnaire's disease or the proliferation of Legionella within your facility water systems. Now, this is obviously a Legionella kind of focused discussion because, again, it's that time of year, but there's been more and more focus on other potential waterborne pathogens within facility or within water systems. And what I'll mention are non-tuberculosis mycobacteria. Those have been associated with biofilms just like Legionella have. And there has been a focus by CDC on tracking these within healthcare systems. But healthcare systems, there's certain reporting requirements for those systems and understanding and tracking from an infection control standpoint. But what about other water systems? What about those that are not being paid attention to, or other systems for, also say, generally a facility, whether it's a store or a warehouse or whatever? There's been a push for other um, other guidance and standards for addressing those issues within other water systems beyond Legionella, other waterborne pathogens. So if you're interested, it's something to consider, because those NTMs are popping up more and more, recognition of them that existing in water systems, because they aren't monitored by public water utilities, just like Legionella is typically not monitored by public water utilities. I'll say some do a pretty good job. But overall, they rely on surrogate measurements. And those surrogate measurements, as you probably know, are not the best for evaluating the presence of Legionella. Some water systems, depending on the type of disinfectant they use, they do some event where they potentially once or twice a year, they do a hyperchlorination event. They say, let's get rid of everything that's potentially in the biofilms, the biofilm within the water mains, etc. These are things you have to consider and look at. A lot of water utilities may not do that. A lot of water utilities may be silent on that. And this is where I want to transition a little bit into this, I'll say, silent discussion. And I think this is important to understand of where problems may arise from what we are doing from a public health standpoint and monitoring. It's important. Data is important to all scientists. And the data that comes from understanding the prevalence of Legionnaire's disease in the population, where it is, et cetera, is super valuable. And there has been a lack of that data. I think that, and I don't know the reasons, it could be a variety of reasons. But this is something that I'm going to have to call out government agencies for this, because I think there's an overall failure from reporting from those agencies and the true impact of those numbers on how we use those numbers. And I spoke about this last year at AIHA Connect about the underreporting that goes on with Legionnaire's disease. And I emphasize it's not only the underreporting by a week-by-week basis, but it's the lack of reporting data at all. So let me give you an example. So for Florida does typically has a reporting system. I'm in Orlando. Has a reporting system for understanding what reportable diseases are, like Legionnaire's disease. They're what they identify as their chart system. Their charts hasn't been updated since 2023. That leaves a data gap on information that we can use to identify how many Legionella cases, Legionnaire's disease cases there are by county, or for the whole state. CDC is similarly lacking. I said that last year at the conference, and they'll probably come out within the next week or two, maybe. But their last annual report for reportable diseases looks to be 2022. Why is it taking so long for these data? I know they want to go in and say, okay, well, we are, we're saying, we're tracing down every travel associated, or making sure we're getting confirmation with, confirmatory tests or suspect cases or whatever is fitting with our case definitions. Put out preliminary numbers. Give us a hand here. The problem here is that there's information gatekeepers. The government is the information gatekeeper. There's reportable diseases. There's mechanisms for reporting that. But if those reportable data are not going to be used in an annualization basis or reporting basis, that's not helpful people who are actually practicing in the field. It's important to point out, though, CDC does typically release weekly numbers, but then you go back to their numbers and they say, well, we're caveating this and you can't rely on these numbers. You have to rely on the annual numbers, but then they won't report the annual numbers. Is it a lack of funding? Is it a lack of interest? Are they overstressed? Are they understaffed? It may be a number of different features and functions. But give the information to public health officials or public health practitioners. Let us evaluate the data. Why isn't there a mechanism for us as public health practitioners who do this all the time, who understand science, to have access to the data and evaluate it and say, okay, there's preliminary data or provisional data. Now, it may be, okay, well, it has identifiable information for a particular individual. Okay, supply to us with that information scrubbed out. Let us help you. Let us do something to analyze that data, but it's not helpful to us. So, this is almost like is I don't want to say ridiculous as it sounds, but this is almost like a call to action. If people can hold the government accountable on this and say, hey, release that data or help these people get that data or something, we're happy to help out. I know a number of people who are probably happy to help out here from an analytical standpoint for this data. But silent on the data, a 3-year lag on annual data numbers is not helpful to us from public health practitioners, because it doesn't help us understand where the disease is. And by all accounts, again, my data evaluation says that there's a good number of underreporting from a week by week basis because of this going back and checking and all this other stuff. And we can probably, if we can determine, I'll say a factor or multiplier to say, okay, well, we're identifying this as X. We need to presume that this number is X plus another value or a certain percentage, that there's actually more than we actually know about. But we need more data, and that data is being kept. And I don't have access to it. Only public health practitioners at the state level or federal level have this access, and we can't get it. So I'm happy to help out. If there's someone at CDC or Florida Department of Health or any health departments, now I'm not saying this is the fact for every state. I haven't gone through and checked for every 50 states. Some states don't even put this information out there, or they definitely keep it behind I'll say a access wall. We're all on the same team here. We're all trying to protect public health. So why is it so difficult to get numbers that we need to protect public health, and no one's putting it out there? No one answers voicemails or emails about it. It just goes unheard. So I'm happy to have a discussion with anyone on that side or someone to help keep people accountable and report that information. So again, it's summertime. The Legionella disease cases Legionnaires disease cases are going to be increasing because of the nature of the timing and temperature. And it's just something that's going to pop up more and more in the news. It's got to be something that building owners and operators need to be acutely aware of to make sure that you're protecting your people, or if you have that are under your care, or if you have people coming in to treat your water systems, have some third-party oversight done, have some peace of mind done. It doesn't cost that much. It's a check to make sure that you're confirming that they're not only doing what they're saying, but it's adequate for what's needed. You don't want somebody just checking a box. You don't want someone saying, well, I did that, because I've seen a lot of box checks that are for the, I'll say, minimum amount of work. And that just kind of gets in the way of actually doing what needs to be done. So if anyone has any comments or questions, please feel free to reach out. If you want to try our new website system from leaving some comments, I'd love for you to try it out. If there's anyone that wants to assist from a public notification standpoint for the access to data that we need and don't have from a reportable Legionellosis standpoint, happy to have that discussion. I appreciate you joining us on today's Exposure Scientist podcast, and hope you tune in again soon. Thanks so much.